Afghanistan is the world's only country where girls are forbidden from attending a secondary school or university solely because of their gender. Defying the ban has its consequences. A private education centre in Kabul was blown up last week. The UN says over 50 people were killed, more than double the Taliban's toll. The victims were mainly girls and young women. The female demonstrators taking to the streets over the bombing were also attacked.
Dozens of young women standing up for their right to be better protected and to have an education. Taliban officials wield sticks to break up the crowd. Then gunfire is heard and the women scramble in panic. The protests were in response to a bomb attack on a private education centre in Kabul. A suicide bomber blew himself up in the women's section of a gender-segregated hall where students were preparing for university entrance exams. Most of the victims were girls and young women who belonged to the minority Hazara community. 19-year-old Wahia was in the classroom when the attack happened. 2 of her friends and the teacher were killed. She managed to escape. She says she won't be intimidated.
The only thing we have is education. Education is our weapon, and they want to take this weapon from us. I want to study law and management and diplomacy because I want to be an influential politician.
Like Wahia, Al-Banin also had big ambitions. Now her photos and her school books are all her family have left of her.
My daughter used to joke with me and say, "I will study until one day I become president or a lawyer and serve the people of Afghanistan." But she was martyred.
Al-Banin was one of the young women killed in the attack. Her family pray at her grave. And her sister vows that she won't give up.
We're really worried. It is hard for us. All the schools are closed for girls. This is very painful, but we will continue with the lessons and we will never give up or stop.
Even brutal attacks like this one haven't crushed the resolve of young Afghan women to keep up their fight for an education.
So what is daily life like for a woman in Afghanistan? We found a former employee of the Afghan postal service who also worked for a non-profit group. But since the Taliban came to power, Dunya can no longer do either. She survived a terror attack 2 years ago, sustaining minor injuries, and says it feels like she's under constant surveillance from the Taliban wherever she goes. We asked her to send us this video diary.
My name is Dunya Sangarniaze. I'm 20 years old and I live in Kabul, Afghanistan. Before the Taliban came to power, I was spokesperson for the organization here in Afghanistan. This organization was dedicated for women and supported Afghan girls in various sectors such as education, economics, technology sector, and etc. We are not allowed by the Taliban government to continue higher education, and they have banned Afghan girls for going outside for their jobs. Whenever I go outside, I feel very panicked. We still have to go out in black clothes and with men's wear. With the arrival of the Taliban, the number of poor people has increased more than before. And these poor people are forced to beg. The educated women can also be found who beg in order to meet their needs. I want to continue my duty and carry out my media and civic activities without any fear. I want to move freely in a peaceful environment. where I can easily do my job without any fear in any kind of sanctions. I want to all those fundamental rights as they are enjoyed by other girls across the globe.
Waslat Hazrat Nazimi is head of our Dari and Pashto service and has just published a book on Afghan women fighting for freedom. Just how restrictive has life now become again for girls and women in Afghanistan?
Hi, Ben. Afghan women's and girls' lives have been restricted to an extreme extent. I'm going to refrain from counting all the restrictions that were put on them in the past year because it has come to a point that Afghan women are confined to their homes and they do not have the right to leave the house without a male chaperone. There are exceptions for women who work in the education and health sector, but mostly women are to stay home. Girls in most provinces are banned from receiving a secondary education, and life has become extremely restrictive for them.
What happens then if they do step out of the house without that male chaperone?
You know, Ben, this is not the first time Afghan women underwent similar restrictions under the first Taliban rule when schooling was forbidden for all girls and women. They have managed to set up underground schools to continue their education, carrying books under their burqas and meeting in secrecy in private houses. We're seeing similar strategies now, which is of course dangerous because there's always the possibility of being caught. Afghanistan, however, is not the same country it was in the 90s. Now girls and women also have access to virtual options as well. There are a number of internet courses teaching Afghan girls the basics, plus a number of coding courses, which are popular as well. I just want to stress that even though these are very positive things, it is not a long-term solution. Afghan girls need to have access to public life and be full members of society, and that includes going to school.
And schooling in secrecy and feeling that you're constantly being observed or followed, it mustn't be the easiest of situations or at all conducive to education. But what dangers do they face? Are we talking about jail here? Are we talking about even harsher restrictions to life?
Well, we haven't heard a lot from the country. It has become extremely difficult to get reliable sources inside the country, and DW has evacuated all the correspondents, so we do only rely on our networks. And I haven't heard a lot about the sanctions that the Taliban have been doing for or punishing girls for going to school or for studying in secrecy. But, you know, Ben, there hasn't been any positive development for women in the past year. We can assume what they might do if they would find out. It also depends on the province because the Taliban themselves are also very divided on this topic, women education and girls education. So if you go to one province, maybe in Balkh, in Mazar Sharif, you will find girls even going to school after 6th grade. But then if you go to another province, say Khost or Helmand, women are completely restricted and girls cannot go to school.
So what sort of a future does Afghanistan face by banning higher education for basically half its population and highly restricting their daily lives?
Well, there hasn't been any positive development for women in the past year at all. Instead, they have lost all of their rights. And as I said, they're confined to their homes. This is why it's so important to support them in their struggle for freedom. In fact, their call for self-determination and freedom is the same cause women in Iran and East Kurdistan are fighting for. It's basically the same fight.